What was your, well, I'm boned moment? Story 1. Very recently, actually. I got my driver's license later than most for various reasons, so I've only been driving solo for a few months now, despite being in my 20s. I wanted to test my newfound freedom by going on a bit of a day trip to a city about a 4-hour drive from home. But I didn't tell anyone where I was going because my family tends to be very protective. I knew they'd worry, so I left town without telling anyone. I got about 3 hours into the trip and was heading down a gravel road, middle of nowhere farmland, not a house or building in sight. I wasn't paying enough attention, sped up too much, and my car started sliding on the gravel. I lost control, veered off the road, and crashed into a wire fence. Luckily, it wasn't a head-on crash, but I scraped along the fence for a fair distance. Cliché as it is, I swear my life flashed before my eyes. My car came to a stop, and the first thing I did was check that I hadn't been hurt. Luckily, I was okay, so I got out to look at my car. The side mirror was shattered and hanging off. Taillights shattered, dents and scratches everywhere, and the rear bumper was hanging down and scraping along the road. My main concern was the bumper. I couldn't drive the car without it dragging and scraping along the road behind me. I tried to shove it back into place, but I wasn't strong enough. It kept falling back out. So I sat on the side of the road for a while, completely alone with no help in sight. I hadn't seen another car for ages, and I had no phone reception. I hadn't told anyone where I was headed, and I had no idea how I was going to get the car home. And it occurred to me that if I had gotten hurt, nobody would have known where to look for me. I felt so helpless and stupid. It was a scary feeling. I spent about an hour pacing and crying beside my car, not knowing what to do, lamely trying to shove the bumper back on. But once the initial shock wore off, I was able to pull myself together again. I shoved as hard as I could, and I realized I could force the bumper back into place, but only briefly. It would stay on for a minute or two and then fall off again. So that's what I did. I shoved the bumper on. I drove for a few feet. The bumper fell off again. I pulled over and shoved the bumper on again. I drove for a few feet. The bumper fell off again. I pulled over and shoved the bumper on again. I drove for a few feet, and I did this over and over and over again until I finally made it back into a small rural town I'd passed through earlier. I was honestly prepared to do this for the whole drive back home, but when I was stopped in this town, a man approached me. He looks at me and asks, "What'd you hit, girl?" I told him what happened, and he nodded. Then he called out to another man who was some distance away. Suddenly, I had 4 people around my car checking it over. The guys managed to get the bumper back into place properly for me so it didn't fall back out again. They assured me I should be all right to drive it home now, as long as I take it easy. I thanked them profusely and carefully made the trip back home, feeling much better than before. I had never before been so happy to pull into my own driveway, and I will forever be grateful to the people who stopped to help me. And next time I leave town, I'm going to tell someone where I'm going. This could have gone so badly. I guess this was a girl, and unfortunately, sometimes girls can be more vulnerable on trips in other places by themselves. Not to say guys can't get taken advantage of either, but it was great that she got help when she did. And as much as you want to be free, I would never go anywhere without telling someone. Doesn't have to be family, could be a friend you trust. Anybody else, anybody that you trust. Story 2. The moment was when I was younger, about 12 or 13, maybe 14, but anyways. We had a home computer, and my cousin and I used it quite a lot. He's 4 years older than me, so add that to one of the ages I typed above. So, with he and I being two teenage boys in the early 2000s and the internet was just beginning to take off, it shouldn't take much of a guess what us two teen boys would frequently visit on our home computer. Also, with it being the early 2000s, basically every computer was extremely susceptible to viruses and malware. Before the incident I'm about to speak about, we had obtained viruses on about 3 or 4 computers, and my cousin and I knew why. We just didn't say anything. Fast forward to our then recent home computer. It was nighttime, everyone was asleep, so I wanted to frequent one of my adult websites. Well, while I was in the middle of watching, the computer went blank for maybe 30 seconds to a minute, and it came back on, and the entire computer had this blank white screen with black text that read something along the lines of, "You have visited this site, this site, this site, this site, this site, Googled these images, images of these, images of these." Basically, imagine your browsing history being exposed to your family, which is exactly what that was. And it just so happened to happen during my use. This was a new virus. I tried for an hour and a half to fix it, but the background remained the same. It wasn't the home page of Internet Explorer. It was literally the background of our home computer, and at the time, our sister lived with us too. I remember unplugging the computer and hoping no one would notice it was unplugged. Of course, I knew they would notice, but I was in a panic. Well, the very next day at school, I got a text from my cousin asking what the hell happened to the computer. I, of course, played dumb, asking what he meant. He told me, and I acted shocked. He said Mom was going to be home soon, and she was planning on using the computer. It was at that moment when I knew I messed up. Got home, and my mom had my sister and cousin sitting on the couch, and my cousin had this forlorn expression on his face, and I had the same on mine. Mom was livid and disgusted as she found out the hard way what her kids and cousin liked to watch, and it was all my fault. The only good thing I took away was this. At least neither my cousin, myself, nor my sister watched child porn because, trust me when I tell you, the computer exposed everything we watched. Usually, that kind of virus would be accompanied by some sort of ransomware these days. And, quite frankly, they don't have to be honest about it either. They would just come up with some various type of sites that most people might have visited before and then tried to exert some sort of ransom from you. This one was very, very specific and very nefarious. Story 3. In my mid-20s, I bought fireworks in Belgium. I put it in my car and I put a blanket around the black hat cover over it. Now nobody can see it. The trunk was full. I would bring the fireworks to the customers the next day. But first, going out to the city center to have fun. Because of my older driving license rules, I'm allowed to drink some alcohol. But I drank much. I didn't feel drunk or so at all. The cafes and discos closed at 4 in the night. I got in my car and was still in a historical part of the city as I get a stop sign from a cop on the side of the road. "Good night. You're our last one. Can I see your driver's license? Did you drink?" Me. "Hello. How are you?" "Yes, I drunk a few." He smelled it anyway. I had the double allowed amount of alcohol in my breath. "You cannot drive anymore. My colleague will take your car and drive it to the police station, nearly around the corner. You can get in the police car." "Okay." Of course, I think, hell, I got a $700 guilders fine, now €350 or about $350, and I was not allowed to drive 3 hours. The car stayed on the police station. I walked home. Of course, I came back 3 hours later to pick up my car. The fine is to be paid later via a letter from the Ministry of Justice. Hello, we took an item out of your car. A baseball stick. Why do you have that in your car? Me. To play baseball. He. We confiscated it. Me, sad. Oh, okay, pity. He said, you can get your car now. Here are the keys and my colleague will open the gate for you. Bye. As soon as I was out of sight, if the police station saw my car, I opened the trunk and I saw that all the illegal fireworks were still there. Amazing that they didn't recognize the gunpowder smell. I had 10 rolls of 100,000 bangers in there and much, much more small but here forbidden fireworks in the car. Oh, that was a roller coaster. It was kind of a bone moment, but he survived it. How the hell did they not notice? Were they thinking that the baseball bat was more important? Were they more focused on that? I think they got a hold of that bat, and that led to some issue that was really important at the time, and they were just so happy to get that they sort of glossed over the rest of the car. That's what I'm thinking. What about you? What do you think about it? Story 4. Not having a cell phone signal saved our lives. We, a group of 3 exchange students, went on a snowshoe hiking trip in the very north of Finland when there were about 2 hours of light per day. Got trapped in a snowstorm with a visibility of 5 meters and a temperature of negative 20 degrees Celsius. Our compass was not working due to a geomagnetic storm on the sun, which messes up the magnetic field on the Earth poles. We had no cell phone signal either. It was the pre-smartphone era, so no Google Maps. Even if we would have had it, we knew that there's only one street with a small village in one direction. In all other directions was nothing for at least the next 100 kilometers. Our game plan? Walk in a random direction for 1 hour. If we get a cell phone signal, we continue. If not, try a different direction. But first, we needed to put the only working SIM card into the only cell phone with battery life left. Sounds easy enough sitting in your living room, in a snowstorm with negative 20 degrees Celsius with the panic thought of don't drop it, running wild in your head. Suddenly not so easy anymore. Afterwards, my friend spinned in a circle and pointed out the direction we were to try first. Lo and behold, he actually chose the right one. Got the desired signal after 45 minutes, continued, found reindeer fences we were able to use for navigating to find a little hut we set off from in the morning. Contacted a local from the village, whose contact we got before setting off, who told us to stay put until the snowstorm dies down. They drove food to us via their snowmobile. After 3 days, we returned safe and sound. Never told my mom about all the gory details. Story 5. In June of 2021, I got pretty bad meningitis that required 2 weeks of antibiotics and a lot of pain meds. A few weeks later, I'd felt great, so went back to my first job and gotten a second job as it was the summer before I went to college. I'd felt dizzy and left my first job 30 minutes early, went home and felt fine, so I left for my ice shack job. I chose to stop at the Big Lots to go to the restroom before my shift. I remember getting out and feeling dizzy, then getting into the store and feels drunk. I remember looking back at the registers and then looking at the ice and refusing to tell people that I felt dizzy and drunk. That was my last memory for 4 days until I woke up intubated and had to be told I'd had a 20-minute seizure and had my life saved by an amazing woman who found me. If I'd had that seizure anywhere else, I'd be dead. I'd made it to the back of the store, but thankfully not the restroom, when I collapsed, and that's how my life was saved. No one thought to mention that even though I felt well after having meningitis, I was a seizure risk. I still went to college, just very highly medicated on seizure meds and with a minor memory problem and partial absence seizures. I don't have brain damage, and I'm off seizure meds with only pictures and PTSD to remember what happened. My last memory before blacking out was thinking, oh, hell, as I looked at a shelf feeling drunk. Turns out I was feeling the warning signs of a seizure and didn't know because I'd never had one. Story 6. It's kind of funny now. A few years ago, I was living in a mobile home out in the country. I had neighbors, but they weren't super close like in the suburbs. Because I was the only one in that trailer, I was only wearing underwear. For some stupid reason I can't remember now, I stepped out of my front door for just a second, thinking I was grabbing a package or something. I thought it wasn't a big deal because I would be super fast. Well, in that moment, the wind grabbed the door and slammed it shut. As I was freaking out about being locked out, it started raining. It would have been humorous if it wasn't happening to me. My phone and keys were locked inside and I was panicking, wondering if I was going to have to run to one of the neighbors and explain what happened, so I could borrow a phone and call a locksmith. What I ended up doing was grabbing a tool from the garden and forcing the door handle. It broke the lock, but I got back inside and nobody saw my underwear.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 7. During my first attempt at college, I wasn't doing well. I was barely passing my classes and my financial aid would be cut off if I failed any of them. One of my classes was career studies, and they required a job shadow of the field you wanted to go into. I wanted to be a drama teacher, so I scheduled my job shadow with my old drama teacher on the last Tuesday of class. Professor had cleared me to take that day off for my job shadow. Class was normally Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m., so I go in Thursday to find a note on the door saying, "Final relocated to building across campus." So I book it across campus. The room where the final was being held had a schedule on the door, and my class was scheduled for 9 a.m. I look at my watch and it's 10:57. Well, I'm boned. Apparently, Professor had let everyone know in class on Tuesday it would be relocated/rescheduled. I wasn't the only person in my class to miss the final either. Professor said it was my responsibility to make sure I made it, and I had failed. Lost financial aid and dropped out. Story 8. One day I was jumping on my trampoline with my cousin and pretending to get shot and going ragdoll. Basically going limp midair, landing on your back, and letting your limbs freely flop about on the residual bounces, like a ragdoll. But somehow, this one time I over-rotated and was completely unaware that I did so and landed upside down on my forehead, causing the rest of my body weight to snap my neck back. At that point, I really was a ragdoll. I couldn't feel or move anything below my neck. I couldn't even breathe. I remember laying there realizing I couldn't move, breathe, or communicate just how boned I was. Just looking at my cousin who was kind of just frozen there looking at me and thought, well, I'm hosed. I can't breathe. I only have a few minutes left. Thankfully, after maybe 15 to 30 seconds of fighting, I managed to start breathing again, and I started slowly regaining feeling and control of my body. After a minute or so, I sat up and looked at my stunned cousin. He asked if I was okay, and I just said, yeah, let's go play Pong. Story 9. My biggest I'm boned moment came pretty recently. This past summer, I decided to take a kayaking class on the Nantahala River in North Carolina. Our first day was paddling on a lake to get us used to the techniques and how to get out of your kayak if you flip. The second day is where I almost perished. I was going down a Class 2 rapid when I lost control of my kayak and flipped upside down. I reached for the dongle you're supposed to pull to get out of the kayak, but couldn't find it because I was being tossed around by the current. Before I got out, I actually had to take a breath and felt a bit of water enter my lungs. Not a fun feeling. I immediately panicked, knowing that I was about to expire if I didn't get out of the kayak, and in some unknown way, forced my way out of the kayak and quickly swam to shore, where I proceeded to cough the water out of my lungs for a good 20 minutes. Story 10. I was 15 and still dealing with the fact that my mother was in a car wreck a couple days prior. I was at an elderly neighbor's house, and they were serving food. Unbeknownst to me, however, I had grabbed a scoopful of pasta with edibles in it. Having never had edibles or pot before, I thought nothing of it. Thankfully, one of the neighbors came in and said, "Oh, don't eat that. It has weed in it." I had taken 2 bites by that point and stopped. About an hour later, I became overly chilled and went back to my grandpa's. I then went to bed and passed the hell out. I woke up and had a seizure caused by my paranoia of the whole thing. My grandpa calmed me and almost called an ambulance. I recovered after falling asleep again and missed school the following morning as I was already excused due to my mom's wreck. She made it out okay and is actually sleeping beside me now on the couch. All I can say is good riddance. Story 11. Making powdered rocket propellant to pack into tubes and launch model cars with. I was testing my latest batch, I believe 4 parts oxidizer to 3 parts fuel, so I sprinkled a bit on the flash pan which I had used a couple minutes before. Then, an ember caught the falling propellant. It burned fast enough to travel up the stream of what was essentially powdered napalm into the glass jar I mixed it in, and starting a chain reaction. Now, rocket fuel, at least powdered, burns from one side to the other, requiring enough surface area to create thrust, and I just gave it about 9 square inches of holy freaking hell with a nozzle made of curse you built in. I had essentially made a glass rocket. The fuel roared to life, the glass jar flying into the ground and shattering both from the impact and the heat. It is to this day the hottest thing I have stood directly over. Story 12. Mine was my senior year. My parents pulled me out of school in the middle of the day. My dad came and got me and said, "We need to have an honest conversation at home," and I knew I was boned. While I was at school, my mom went through my room to find a hat of mine. She wanted to measure the size so we could buy a cap and gown, and when she went through my room, she found all my junk. My mason jar filled with roaches for joints, my battery, 4 empty carts, and a couple of Smirnoff ice cans. Now, this might not seem like much to you guys, but my parents were pastors and hated substances with a passion. I personally don't care as much. I smoke weed regularly and I don't drink anymore. I don't really enjoy it, but the Smirnoff ice I had was actually pretty good. Story 13. I've had a lot of these moments, but the most recent one happened last year. It was the first snowfall of winter, and I used the excuse of going to clean my car off to get outside. Dad warned me that there was ice out, but I figured I knew better. I did not know better, not one bit. Opened the garage, brushed a little snow off Mom's car, then slipped like Marv from the first Home Alone with my left leg in the air. It went by in slow motion for me, and the next thing I knew, I was on the ground with a sprained ankle. Crawled and hobbled my way back inside. Didn't even make it anywhere near my car. 0 out of 10, not worth it. Needless to say, I listen to my dad when he says there's ice outside now. Story 14. The chair thing, second to last story. I work with mentally disabled adults. Before my current company, I worked at another company with other people. My father had been running this company for my entire life, so I'd known some of the people since I was a kid. They were actually my friends. Anyway, there was a rolly chair in this one group of guys' house for staff to do computer work in. I was sitting in the chair watching TV with my guys and leaned back. The chair fell backwards, and everyone starts laughing. I was also laughing. I figured I had leaned back too hard, so I got up and leaned back again, but softer. Nope. Chair was just prone to falling because I fell 2 more times. Last time was a mistake, and I had not leaned back. Great day. Story 15. We had this bottle of red strawberry syrup on top of the fridge when I was talking to a friend as we were getting ice. The ice in the bag was still a giant chunk, so as I started to break it down with a wooden spoon, I didn't realize the bottle slowly inching towards the edge with each hit at the ice. Finally, it dropped, and out splatters the thick, bright red syrup all over me with my friend in the dining room, stunned. It literally looked like an explosive unaliving had happened, and I knew I was boned with my mother just outside tending to her garden. I put the spoon down, looked at her, and said, "Well, I'm gonna perish." I started picking up the glass and awaited my fate. Story 16. The only one that comes to mind is while driving home, took a wrong exit. Ended up at a stop sign on the top of a hill. Stopped, looked both ways, all 4 ways before making a left turn. Proceeded with my turn, and then start hearing a car horn blaring from my right. They were speeding over the top of the hill, and as soon as I heard the car horn, immediately I thought, oh, I'm hosed. Pulled into the oncoming lane on the left side and was fine. Pulled back into the correct lane and on the side of the road and proceeded to have a panic attack. It really needs to be a four-way stop. Story 17. My mom started choking at the dinner table once. I wasn't too worried because I had lots of medical training and she was still coughing and taking in air. Most people can clear the airway on their own. All of a sudden, you could hear the airway fully obstruct. She managed to clear it a few seconds later, but by the time she did, I was already up around the table and ready to perform the Heimlich. Now, she says she never has to worry about choking at the dinner table when I'm around.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.